And Dawn and I will start admitting everyone. We'll just give it a minute while everyone joins us. All right. So everyone has come in, I think, and we're expecting a few more folks, but they will probably jump on as they arrive. And Dawn will keep an eye on the waiting room, make sure that folks are getting in. So I would just like to say hello. Welcome to the meeting today. My name is Raeesa, and I'm the Manager of Operations and Programs for the Atlantic Presenters Association. And I would like to acknowledge that I live and work in Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I would like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Today we're passing the torch a little bit. We're inviting Raeesa Lalani from the Prismatic Arts Festival to take the lead on the conversation today. We'll be going through the summer doing a series of these talks in partnership with Raeesa and with Prismatic. So I'm just gonna hand it right over to Raeesa. She's the incoming artistic director, and yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I also would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you in Jipuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I am honored to work in these territories and to share in the cultural lives of residents of Mi'kma'ki. So as Lisa said, my name is Raeesa Lalani, and I'm the incoming artistic director of the Prismatic Arts Festival. And I want to thank you all so much for being here with us today. I know the Zoom fatigue is starting to set in, so I sincerely appreciate your virtual presence for a conversation that we started a couple of weeks ago that absolutely needs to continue and is incredibly important. So for those of you who are joining us, I just wanted to let you know that this conversation is being recorded. And the reason for that is we've had a few people that are unable to make it, and they have asked for a link. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that is happening. And if you are just joining us today, so this is actually part 2 of a conversation that we've started in our series called Voices We Need to Hear, Indigenous Artists and Artists of Color. And the intention of this conversation a few weeks ago, we recognized in the midst of the pandemic, as we were participating in so many calls across the arts sector, that the time and space had not been made for a specific group within the arts sector. And at Prismatic, this is something that we've always done and that we will continue to do, and that is to listen to the people and get our guidance from the people that are creating the work, which is the artists, specifically Indigenous artists and artists of color. So the conversation started a couple of weeks ago, and today we are going to continue to hear from various artists across the country, maybe about some of their successes or their challenges or what is important to them to move forward, or just their thoughts. This space is for the artists to talk to us. And I really want that to be the key takeaway of this conversation, is we need to listen to Indigenous artists and artists of color because they know themselves best, they represent their communities, and they know what they need to move forward. But that being said, we absolutely do need to listen to the policymakers and government and specialists as we all work to reopen the arts sector. But today we are going to listen to the artists. And I want to thank each of you sincerely for being here today and for your willingness to share your voice and your thoughts with us. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing our guests. We have 4 artists that we are going to hear from. And if anyone has any questions as we start with these conversations, please feel free to add it into the chat box. Our friends at APA are going to be monitoring that, and we have allotted some time and space for those questions after. And first, I'm very pleased to introduce Esie Mensah. So Esie is a dancer, choreographer, and movement director who brings her mastery in storytelling to a wide audience. Esie is committed to using Afrofusion to explore more personal narratives of our Ghanaian heritage, Blackness, and belonging. Esie is an incredibly talented artist, and we had the honor of having you on the Prismatic stage last year in Ottawa. Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for being here with us today. So I will let you take it away so you can share some of your thoughts and experiences with us.
Wonderful. Greetings, everybody. I thank you very much for allowing me to be able just to speak my truth and continue to speak my truth during this time. I just want to acknowledge the land that I stand on, but also the lives that have been lost recently. There has been a lot of turmoil that has happened in North America, and this time for me is a time for healing. It's a time for upheaval. It's a time for change. And so I give gratitude to Prismatic for administering this conversation, and to APA as well. So to speak about myself, I am a newer artist, a newer company, Mensah Creations. I presented last year at Prismatic. My work for me speaks to my community about social conversations and healing for the Black community, but it's a narrative that speaks to everyone. So I find that for myself, in order for people to understand the Black experience, they also need to be able to see themselves within our own experiences, so that way they understand that what we are going through isn't that far off from what people experience within their everyday lives, and just in different ways. The form in which that I choose to create from is Afrofusion. Afrofusion is a style that I created on my own. It is a style that I have spent almost 10 years crafting and working on. It's about it is a form that involves traditional and contemporary West African dances mixed with, infused with urban, Latin, Caribbean, and modern styles. My fusion work gives me an open canvas to consistently pull from and utilize when I am creating, when I am teaching. These forms also get accompanied with the movement direction work that I do, and I do these things at spaces like Soul Pepper Theatre, Shaw Festival, Obsidian Theatre in Toronto, and so that my knowledge as a movement director pulls in a form of intention into the work. It brings in narratives into the work that is a strong part of who I am as an artist. The healing part for me is really necessary. I work from an intuitive space. So I don't create from the typical lens that many others do. My career within dance and within the sector started in the commercial form. So I'm already coming at the concert dance world through a very different lens. And for me, as a healer, as a speaker, as a writer, I want to be able to tell my stories and the stories of my community in beautiful ways. So I have 3 pieces: Shades, which speaks about Shadism, which is I guess my most well-known work. And within this time of uprooting systematic racism, Shadism is also at that root that also should be acknowledged and should be also discussed. So that is a work that I have spent 4 years actually crafting. I presented it last year, most recently for the IPP showcase through Fall for Dance North. And then I'm just working about continuing the conversation. This is something that for me is very necessary in a part of my engagement and the education that I want to bring forward. The work isn't just a static work that we just perform and then that's it. It's about being able to see the work and see the future of what the work can bring. So being able to engage with the community, having talkbacks is also a very necessary part of what it is that I want to be able to bring my audiences and be able to form relationships with presenters that are open to having these dialogues and conversations, because as we can see right now, this is all that's happening. We need to talk, we need to heal. These are things that can't be overshadowed or just, thrown away and wait for them to be discussed in time. It's like the time is now, and these conversations are necessary. And it's necessary because for an issue like Shadism that hits a lot of communities of color, it's important for our white counterparts to understand the struggles that many of us are going through, and in ways how they may also be putting up their own biases based on a shadist or shade as a model, color as a model, without their knowledge, and how they could also make changes to be able to see things differently. My first piece that I created was a coma, and it was about belonging. It was about the story of an immigrant that leaves their land. So an immigrant that came from Ghana, set his roots in Canada, and was wavering with the decision to go back. Also coupled with my own story in terms of myself being of Ghanaian heritage, born in Canada, but when I go to Ghana, they don't necessarily see me as Ghanaian. So it's another issue with a lot of immigrants in terms of their story and how they can be seen and represented within the communities, and how, you know, what does it mean to claim something, to claim your heritage, even if you're not necessarily born on that land. And then the last piece, which I actually presented at Prismatic last year, which deals with a lot of shadow work, being able to uncover the hidden parts of yourself, is Zio. I premiered it last year, which was amazing, and I give so much gratitude for that opportunity. And it's a work that I crafted from my own experiences in terms of having to move through and move past various parts of myself to be able to own the being and the body and the spirit that I lay in right now, and was being able to guide that work through with my dancers as well, and being able to allow them to release, you know, aspects of themselves that they don't necessarily need. So the spiritual aspect for my work is very, very present and is very prevalent. It allows me to go deep into the belly of the beast. I often say, in order to create change, whether it's change through the dancers and change for my audience, but I feel for myself as a creator, as an artist, that I have almost a social responsibility to bring light into the spaces that I am invited to be able to bring conversation and to bring healing. Because of this time that we are in with the world, I have been speaking a lot, and I've been asked to speak a lot with various panels. If you are a subscriber to the Dance Current, you would have seen me on the cover, as well as an article that I wrote about cultural appropriation. All of these aspects of myself feed into the work, and the work that I am passionate about, the work that I want to be able to see shift the sector. In terms of what it is that I need from people, or what I would like from presenters, it's really about being able to create a relationship, and within that relationship, understanding that your audience may need something that you may not realize as a presenter, potentially. And the need for that, and the need for those conversations, especially now within a time of change, I think it's very necessary to be able to engage people and to educate people about who I am and my experiences, but also about a larger global issues that we face as a Black artist, as a Ghanaian woman, as an artist of color, and how all of those feed into, to me, what can create incremental changes within people's lives, and hopefully within who you choose to involve in the future. I think that as myself, as a newer artist that's coming up, it's very oftentimes that you feel marginalized, and the hump of getting presented is very present. But I want people to be driven about the message that I can bring, and how that message can continue to create a change that I think right now, especially in Canada, is severely needed. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Esie. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to just kind of go along to all of our artists, and then we can have a nice discussion after. So next we have Yolanda Bonnell, whose pronouns are she, her. Yolanda is a queer two-spirit Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and South Asian performer, playwright, and poet from Fort William First Nation in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Now based in Toronto, Yolanda's Dora-nominated solo Bug appeared at Theatre Pass Marai in February 2020, co-presented by Manadoom's Collective, which she runs with Cole Alvis. And Yolanda, thank you so much for your presence today, and thank you so much for your willingness to share your thoughts and voice with us. Welcome.
Yeah, miigwech for having me and inviting me here. Ani bojo Yolanda Nindishnikas kijiba maanga nindigo jabwe mang makwa nindodem Fort William First Nation in Donjaba Dagarandoninda. My name is Yolanda Bonnell. My spirit name is Circling Wolf. I'm currently on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, which is my ancestral lands. So the Anishinaabe migrated from the east all the way down through this land, through Manitoulin and up northwestern Ontario and beyond, which is where I'm from, but my ancestors have come through this land. And so I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be on ancestral land, and I do connect that to my arts practice, so which I do want to kind of talk a little bit about. So my my practice is as a playwright and a writer and a poet. My creation practice is, I've sort of largely based it most recently in land-based creation. I've been writing since I was a young person, and I feel like my connection to land and my connection to like my bloodline and my blood memory in terms of like the connection to the land is how I find where most of my inspiration comes from. I spent some time in Newfoundland last year working on one of my plays, and my grandfather was from Newfoundland, and so there is something really special about being in a place where again, like there's a blood memory to that land. And so I really feel the presence of my ancestors when I work and when I create, and I feel like that roots a lot of my work in my own truth. I've been reading a book called Dancing on Our Turtle's Back by Leanne Simpson, which I highly recommend. It's about Anishinaabe resurgence, and one of the things she talks about in there is so the word Dubwewin in Anishinaabe means truth, and the word Ode means heart. And so when you put the O before Dubwewin, it's Odubwewin, and which actually translates to the sound my heart makes, or the sound the heart makes, which is still rooted in truth. And so I've been sort of like taking that in, and especially right now, when you know, we're talking about racial injustices, and I think about my like where my voice is needed and when I pull back and that sort of thing. And so yeah, it's been a time. So I guess to speak a little bit about my work, my solo show Bug was created while I was in theater school, and so the work that I do in particular with that work is largely based around Indigenous women. The National Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry was released last year, and like no movements happened on it, and more Indigenous women are being killed, and I really felt like it was really important for my work to be centered on Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, non-binary folks. And so when I talk about Bug is about you know, a young Indigenous woman grappling with addictions and being in the foster care system. And for me, it was really important not to focus on what the stereotype is about Indigenous people, but rather the root of where those struggles come from. So the root of colonization and how that affects our communities. And it's not just our communities. We see how colonization has affected the Black community as well. And so whenever I tell my stories and write my stories, it's really important for me to make sure that people understand that there is a root to all of these stereotypes that were created for us. And so for something like Bug, it can be a tricky story, and it can be a hard thing to witness sometimes and to even go through and feel, but to understand that through that there's hope and there's healing, and a lot of that healing comes from being on land and being with ancestors, and cultural connection. And for me, it's interesting that, you know, I find healing in cultural connection, but that cultural connection was often removed or taken away from us as young people. I grew up on a reservation, but I didn't have access to my culture in a lot of ways. There were little bits here and there. Like we definitely went to powwow, and we definitely had like, I saw cedar branches, but I had no understanding of what those things meant. And so in this time over the last, you know, so many years where there's been a huge like reclamation in terms of like Indigenous people who have lost it that are finding it again, and even lost it is not the right word. I think just sort of taken away and like reclaimed it, right? And so that sort of idea and feeling affects a lot of the work that I do. And I have another piece called White Girls in Moccasins that I'm working on, which is the residency with Buddies in Bad Times, which deals a lot with cultural appropriation and the idea of being whitewashed and growing up whitewashed and what that means for me as like a brown person trying to pass as white, or believing, you know, the internalized racism, carrying that inside of me, how to navigate that, and so it's a character, and it's largely based on my own story, but it is a girl and her inner white girl, and so it's her and her inner white girl and then her ancestor trying to figure out how to like deal with those things. So I'm really proud of a lot of the like all of the work that I've done, and I continue to try to write stories that center the voices of Indigenous women that have largely been silent. I have Two Place Scanner and My Sister's Rage, which both have 7 to 8 women in the play, and you know, I think it's important that we continue to write stories or tell stories that have multitudes of people, because there's something really impactful and important and resonant to see a large amount of bodies of color on stage, and in particular for my community, for Indigenous women. You know, it's often that like plays with 2 people will get produced, or 3 people, but like I want to see like 7 to 10 people on stage, like massive amounts of women, like the power that comes from that. You know, when we were speaking earlier, when I was at the NAC doing Unnatural and Accidental Women, the power of being in a room full of Indigenous women and was like nothing I've ever felt before. It wasn't until moving to Toronto, where I've been in rooms with only POCs, where I've been in rooms with other Black people, with South Asian people, with Asians, and like the feeling of being in a room that without white people, without that sort of lens or presence, was incredibly was a feeling I can't even describe, because coming from a place like Thunder Bay, it didn't happen very often. And so the importance of representation and rooms with other POCs and BIPOC people, it's so important. And so when with my work and the activism that I do, I try to encourage like institutions to like start dismantling their systems that are based in colonial structures. So decolonizing spaces is really important to me. Making sure that BIPOC people are at leadership roles. We need boards of directors either dismantled completely, or that they are largely made up of people of color. And same with directors, playwrights, artistic directors. Like, we need to deconstruct this, whatever this is that theater is. And my goal is that we take theater out of the hands of capitalism and put it back into the hands of the storytellers, because that is how we will create the most effective change in terms of, you know, the safety of BIPOC artists in these rooms. Yeah, I have a lot more to say, but that is yeah, big witch.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And I know we'll get back to hearing some more of what you have to say, because I'm sure everyone wants to. But I will move on to the next artist. So we have Jorge Requena Ramos, who is an award-winning filmmaker and musician from Mexico. He documented his experience migrating to Canada with his directorial debut in the documentary Frostbite, made for Omni TV Rogers. He has directed dozens of short films and music videos, and he is the voice of the Manitoba band, the Mariachi Ghost, who I believe were just nominated for 3 WCMA, so congratulations on that. And thank you so much for being here. Yeah, a little Congrats, Dance. Thank you so much for being here. So Jorge, take it away, share your voice with us.
Yeah, so I would like to acknowledge that I live in Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral home of the Dene people, the Ojibwe people, the Ojibwe people, and the Cree people. And I am a first-generation immigrant. I came from Mexico when I was already an adult, or I'd like to think so, 21. And you know, I pretty quickly realized that I didn't understand as an immigrant the relationship between Indigenous people and immigrants, and I spent the better part of my time in Canada trying to understand and in a way make personal reparations for my role living and existing in this country. Volunteering as much as I can with Indigenous organizations, and learning to listen and listening to the voices of Indigenous change. Especially living in Winnipeg, which is a city that has the highest population of Indigenous people in an urban area in Canada. It's very present in my everyday life. I decided to go into arts at MIN slowly through my career as an artist, to continue performing and continue delivering films and continue to do art. But I decided that I, as a person of color, I needed to find a way to get into a leadership position myself so that I could amplify the voices of other Indigenous people. And following the example of Shahin, who's one of my mentors, and Raeesa, I have great respect for the work that them and Maggie do with Prismatic Festival. I perform at Prismatic 3 times. And, it's hugely inspirational. And, I'm being the lightly brown, if so, but the brown person in the room at the backstage at a lot of festivals in Western Canada. I often find the other brown person and sit next to them is not something that we do willingly. It's just safe. And we end up talking about, like the festivals that are kind of good for that, and the presenters that are good for that, and, people that are showing a specific kind of respect, or, like a willingness to listen and learn and stuff like that. And, I've talked about Prismatic with a lot of people in those settings, and they're always like, what, there's what in Halifax? And so, I'm hoping that movement grows in a way. The work I've done with the Mariachi Ghosts over the last 10 years has earned us a platform. We like to push buttons, but it's always really important for us that the Latin American sound and Latin American influences are a part of the mainstream. We want to make sure that the mainstream expands. Like, mainstream is like this little, and we want the mainstream to be colorful and big and huge and understanding, and listening to the voices of people of color and Indigenous people, specifically in Canada. And so in order to do that, there needs to be like groundbreaking art. There needs to be, like, we need to be in the award system. We need to be making money. We need to be buying property and generating, generational wealth as artists of color and as people of color. And we need to be the gatekeepers, and we need to, shatter the gates and destroy them. And so in October, I joined the role as the artistic coordinator of the Western Cultural Center, which is where I work right now. It's one of Canada's venerable venues. If you've been a touring act, you played it. And so from that position, I'm now able to, buy more music from artists of colors, present more theater and films from artists of color. It's a great feeling to be able to do that. But I think it is going to take a lot more of that. And, I know that the organizations, for all of the artists and arts presenters that are part of the organizations that present art, it takes decades to get to those roles. And, I have a lot of respect for you. However, it is a time in which boards need to be thinking about the representation in that board, the representation in the festival. It's not just about programming. It's like, is the artistic director somebody that is a person of color or understands the plight of peoples of color, and how that relationship can enrich the Canadian fabric. It is our job as tastemakers and as artists and as presenters to be the cultural voice of Canada. And the more colorful that cultural voice is, the better it will be for all of Canada. Little by little, the kids that are coming into our spaces, the young people that are coming into our spaces, for example, they're not used to seeing a brown punk band. Like, I'm talking about people that grew up with me, and when they see a brown punk band, there's something about it that is cool and weird and different, and they don't know what is the offset because it's punk music. right? But the second it's a brown punk band, it's a little bit different, and it enlightens them in a way. It's very quick and easy, and it doesn't have to be like, you know, a punch of a message that, like, you know, it feels like a hit. But some of those punch messages are also necessary. And so for people that have earned a platform, like myself, right now what we're trying to do is we're actually stopping shows in the middle of a song and delivering a poem that we're working with the local chapter of Black Lives Matter and the Bear Clan to sort of try to build a poem that makes people a little bit uncomfortable and makes them kind of shake in their seat and acknowledge the fact that they're in a place that has a huge diversity and that they can't be colorblind anymore. That colorblindness is unacceptable and a consequence of racism. And that, you know, people that come from places that are post-colonial, like myself, coming from Mexico, a place that lived the horrors of post-colonialism, you know, to a greater degree than Canada, if a long time ago, you know, like my indigenous people, the ones that I have, you know, bloodline from, got decimated and destroyed. And so, you know, my message to the indigenous kids that I teach in the indigenous film club that I teach in is your existence is resistance, and your existence itself is power. And the fact that you're still here is incredible and great, and you have to do something with that, right? And so they're young artists that often get inspired with that. And that's our job. And you know, as presenters and buyers, our job is to find people that can light that torch and carry that torch forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jorge. All right, so our next and final guest, which I'll introduce, and then we'll kind of open it up. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. Our next and final guest is Shahin Sayadi, who is a writer, director, actor, scenographer, and founder of One Light Theater. He is an Eastern storyteller and a lifelong fan of Bruce Lee. Shahin, thank you so much for being here with us to share your thoughts with us, and we'd love to hear from you. I think you're muted. Perfect.
No, thank you, Prismatic, and of course, Atlantic Presenters Association, and everybody who's with us today. I'm not in my home, Halifax, and that's you know, Chipuktuk is home for me. I'm originally from south of Iran, from Abadan, but Halifax is home for me. Land of the Mi'kmaq, and I, especially these days, I really miss everybody and everything and everybody. So it's very nice to see all of you. It's very nice to see that, you know, we have 4 people talking about our times right now, and but 3 of them are young artists. I just want to talk about this. You know, that I spend a lot of my time, some of you on this call remember, I spent a lot of my time, my early times in the arts community, fighting for the labor issues of artists of color in performing arts across Canada. A lot of fights, a lot of hard fights in Ottawa and Toronto and all over the place. One of the things that always was with me, and I always said it to a lot of people that we were fighting with, and we continue to fight, was that, you know, you actually have no idea that when the time comes for my daughter and the next generation, they will be not apologetic for what is their rights. And you can see that now. You know, I'm sitting behind people like Esie and Yolanda these days, because they are getting out there and they're saying it as it is. No apologies, no holding back, not worrying about connections and opportunities that even I, you know, a lot of people thought, oh, you know, I'm fighting very hard. Even I was hiding behind those things and was scared. This is the next thing. There is no going back. especially what has happened with our fight for equity issues, and then there's this pandemic and what has done with the performing arts. We're in a new era. We're in a new era, and nothing will stop this. The change is real now. And I feel very sorry for people who don't see this, that the next phase of our being, who we are going to be all over the world, not just in Canada or US or all over the world. Who we're going to be is going to be, like Dave Chappelle said a couple of weeks ago, you know, it's being decided on streets. It's being decided by young artists, like I said, like Esie and Yolanda. And that's where we are. So I'm going to be, I want to be a little practical, as that's who I am. And talk about what I think is happening and where we're going, and how I'm doing my work and how I'm fitting into all this, and that might be helpful. One of the things that is happening with us in performing arts right now is people are trying to survive, and a lot of live streaming of recorded work or live is happening. And I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it. I know at the end of the day, only the bigger organization with lot more resources will be the only ones who could do that work well. I understand, you know, we have to move on. We have to make work. We have to keep going. We have to, you know, we have to keep working and move on. I understand that, and I appreciate that. And even for my own work, or the work that I do with festival, we might have to do that, but I don't like it. It's undermining greatly, undermining what I signed up for. What I signed up for is telling stories person to person in a room or in an open space, but person to person, being live, feeling the heat of the space that we're in with the people, coming together with people. That's what I signed up for. And you know, it's very hard to think about it, that my career in that way might be over. And we're looking at a new way of doing it. But I'm gonna try to wait it out as much as possible to see how we can go back to that live performance. At the same time, I understand things will not be the same. The public perception of participating in events will change, has changed, and it will affect forever. Forever, we're gonna have different view from community about live performance. Public support will change drastically, and that's businesses, people coming to the theater, all of it will change. Even, you know, some provinces, Nova Scotia just opened up for 50 people to get together. But logistically, we all know that only those with bigger resources, bigger spaces are actually able to do that with keeping social distancing in mind. All of it have changed and will continue to change. In middle of all this, something that makes me very happy is what I said earlier, and I want to go back to that now, from my perspective as an artist of color working in performing arts, now we are moving behind our young artists. We're standing behind their courage and moving forward within this change. And they will be the ones who will be writing this future, as they are doing it right now. On social media, which is really the only thing we have right now to stay active and stay participate in the community. So I'm working on my stories, writing. Sometimes I get up and try to use the little space I have at home to to think of the design and the staging of the work, and at the same time trying to stay active on social media and within the community, especially calling person to person, and doing videos with friends and colleagues, and staying active in that way. Another thing I want to talk about, and I think big change will come, again, related to what I said at the beginning, is the way in which we did work. And this one, I mean more practical stuff, like the rules and regulations of contracts and what decides what work happens in what spaces. It will change. I promise you, in the next few months, you're going to see some big companies coming out and saying that they will not be working under some of the older contracts that been regulating our performing arts communities forever. And I'm not saying good or bad, but I'm saying this is happening right now. A lot of companies will be coming out in the very, very short time. And because they want to open the space, because they are forced to open their spaces. They are forced to share their resources. They cannot work under the old rules and regulations, contracts, union stuff. All of it is about to change in the next very short time. And I'm just gonna leave it there. Again, thank you. But especially thank you for giving voice to the artists. Because, as we all know, when things like this happen, or when we want to know about community outreach, ticket sales, working, we always go after policymakers and governments and policymakers and policymakers and policymakers. And I always believe that the one who knows best is the artist. And so thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Shahin. So before I have a question, but I wanted to check if anyone else has any questions. Feel free to write it in the chat, or if you want to even unmute yourself and ask it. Our panelists are here to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll just wait a couple of seconds in case there is anything. Okay, well, maybe I'll start it then. Esie, you kind of touched on it, and anyone please feel free to answer. But I think for presenters, I would really like to know, as an artist, what are you looking for from a presenter? Or as an artist, what do you want to see from a presenter when either they're approaching you for you to have your work on their stages, or whether it's in a context of what you want their contracts to look like? Shahin, you mentioned that a little bit, but I think it's really important, like you said, Shahin, but also, we need to hear from the artists. What do you need? What do you want? How do you foresee this looking? If anyone wants to kind of go ahead and answer.
I guess I'll start. For me, it's about understanding that the work isn't just about what gets presented on stage. Like for me, I'm really about the community engagement, community audience engagement, audience education. How can we go out to consistently make sure that the piece is the gateway, it's the doorway to a room, a house full of other conversations that can come, other things that we can discover as artists, things that the audience can discover. It has to be, for me, it's just like creating a two-way street. It's not, I always find that when I present and we don't have that chance to actually have a dialogue, it's just, to me, it sacrifices the work. And also understanding timing, for when you are unpacking these conversations, I can't have a 45-minute talk back. I did a 3-hour talk with my cast on YouTube just a few weeks ago. And even then, that's still not long enough. People are often, I'm always told, it's just like, oh, the timing. And I was just like, you have no idea. You have to give space, because it takes about an hour for people to feel comfortable in having the conversation, and then they start to ask questions, and then those questions have questions. You have to give space to the time that is needed to have those conversations, and that for many people are not understood. You know, I want to be able to work with presenters that understand, okay, great, are we going to do the shows, and then are we going to designate a whole day, you know, for blocks of time for conversation in different ways. You know, there has to be ways that we can start to look at things. I understand, because I've had to self-produce, I understand costs, theater costs. So how can we try to make it so that way maybe it's not in the theater, but maybe it's on a day that everybody comes back and we have those sit down conversations with people. Also for, in relation to shades, because of the content of the work, it's very needed to be able to say, I would love to be able to come into schools to have these conversations. You know, I'm working with people to kind of create some type of information or education package that goes into schools, because that's the one thing that's the one request I keep getting asked. You know, how can you bring shades into schools? I'm like, we can, but as Yolanda said, it's like, I have a cast of 7 melanated people in my show. You know, I understand that my visions require bodies. And sometimes because of those bodies, I understand that with the dollar sign that gets put beside it, because you have to think about cost, about getting people there, you know, can you do your show with 4 people? No, I just can't. If you want to see the work and you want to experience the work, it's needed to have these bodies. So how can we continue to work together to understand to make the visions of that float in my head? Why can't I see them come into fruition? Especially when you see other companies bringing in, you know, groups from across the pond that are bringing in 14, 15, 25 dancers. It's like, so why can't you support Canadian artists in that same way? If you're going to invest, I understand that brings in more money. I get it. I've had to play both sides of it as a producer and as the artist. So I understand that it really comes down to dollars and cents. But for me right now, in order for us, or for me particularly, to create the work that I want to do, there's going to need to be bodies, and there's going to need to be more than just us showing up and performing.
Thank you.
Yes, so similarly to Esie, I think for me it revolves around as well community engagement and care. So at Mana Dunes, often when we're engaging in the talks with presenters, we come at them with, you know, with Bug, for instance, it involves workshops with Indigenous youth and women. And so how are you as a presenter going to support that? So we as a company are in a sort of in a privileged position, because we can apply for funding for right now, take care of that aspect of it, to take care of the community engagement aspect of it, or the cultural aspects, you know, like bringing in an elder, doing an opening feast, a lot of things that are sort of rooted in Indigenous values, which, I mean, are decolonial ways of being in space with each other in terms of theater. And so that's what we can do right now. But what I want to see from presenters, I think that what needs to happen is that there needs to be funding put into place to support those aspects of every show, in particularly cultural specific shows, because we have to do that community engagement. What they have to understand is that marginalized, racialized communities don't have the same access to theater as white folks do, or non-racialized communities. Like there's an imbalance, there's a difference there. So often we have to go out and bring in those audience members, and ticket prices need to be accessible. We can't have, you know, if I'm doing a show about Indigenous women that are struggling with addictions, do you think that or that are struggling with homelessness, do you think that homeless woman is going to be able to afford a $25 ticket to see a show where she's represented, or where she gets to see herself and she understands that she's not alone? We need to be able to do more to encourage, you know, your non-typical theater going audiences, which are our communities, to be able to come into these spaces, to feel welcome in these spaces. because often you know, I remember going to a big theater for the first time. I looked around, I was like, this place is not for me. I don't belong here. You know, like playing the game when I, you know, in theater school, when I'd go to Soul Pepper or Can Stage and look around and play the game, like how many other people of color are in this room? You know, like it was like literally turning around and be like, oh, there's one. There's no, that's not one. No, wait, no, maybe, I don't know. Like like that, you know, we need to be able to feel welcome in our own spaces. And so I think that presenters need to do more, companies need to do more, institutions need to do more in terms of like finding the ways to get funding for that, for those ways of community engagement and outreach and care. So what we do when I talk about care as a radical act, you know, it comes in terms of like dismantling the ways that theater has typically run. And so, you know, when you come into a room, you're expected to drop your baggage at the door and come in professional and like you're ready to work. But like we're human, and that's not how we can work, you know. So we, you know, as at Manadunes, we collectively inspire people to come in and like, we're going to have a check-in circle. We're going to have a talking circle. We're going to see where everyone is at today. How are you feeling physically, spiritually, emotionally? Where are you at right now, so that we know how to be in space with each other. And that's just respect. That's community care. And so it's these little things that may seem little, but actually have huge ripples, because then what happens is that those people then are like, wow, I was able to speak my truth, and maybe I'm not carrying it anymore, because now we're all collectively carrying it. We're all holding each other up. And if that's not like what's the root of storytelling, then I don't know what is, you know? So for me, like those are the types of things that I really want to see. I really want to see more institutions and more presenters sort of engaging in those types of acts.
Can I ask, and I don't know if people can actually say or raise their hand. I can't really see everybody, but who here is like, there's theater presenters, there's music presenters, there's all sort of presenters? Like
there's all kinds.
Okay, just from a perspective of music, and having played in a lot of like really big festivals across Canada, if you look at the posters, of who's playing on those festivals, very rarely do you see people of color on those main stage positions. And I understand that those are the people that are bringing the people into the festival. So like you need Mumford and Sons on the cartel. I get it. But there needs to be brown people on big letters, and they need to be on the main stage. And so there needs to be an effort to generate spaces for those people, even if they're not the most famous act, because what you are as presenters, as buyers, they're your tastemakers. Everybody that is coming into your spaces is trusting your opinion about the work of other people. And when you empower those people by letting them open for Mumford and Sons, or letting them open for, or letting them play after, or, you know, wedging people of color in between the big acts, is you're giving them that same importance as those people. And they could be local musicians from your community that you're empowering, and all of a sudden there's tons of people that love them. I'm telling you, because that happened to me with Jazz Festival here. Jazz Festival gave us a space on the main stage, you know, on a, you know, they put us on Latin night, and I asked them to take us off Latin night and put us on the night where all of the white bands were playing. And, you know, they listened and they put us in that space. And from that moment on, we were able to do like a lot of other really big things, because all of a sudden we had 3,000 people watching us play and liking the show, and they would have not been there for Latin night, right? And so there is a way in which, by selection and grouping, it's easy to create segregation, even if with good intentions. Like a lot of the Latin American community will disagree with me on this, but Latin night on a festival, like Latin spaces grouping like the Cubans and the Mexicans into a show, is segregating those people. And then only people that like Cuban and Mexican music are gonna go to those shows. It's important to sort of use your marquee performers to empower the other performers, the people of color in your community or from abroad. And you know, like to the point of the other people speaking here, in order to generate those spaces, when you're generating, like when you have workshops where you're including, you know, people of color and people with diversity of music. I've, in my experience at festivals, when they put a workshop, they're like, hey, this jazz guy that is really important, and this other jazz guy that is really important. They're finally in a workshop, but you're kind of like misusing that you could have this important jazz guy and this African musician that just moved to Canada in the same workshop, and the jazz guy will learn something. You know, they'll have more fun than they ever had on stage because it's something new for them, but so will the audience. And so there are ways in which you can empower. I don't want to tell you how to do your jobs also, because I know it's hard enough. And I know you're like stretched to the max and like, you know, applying for every kind of council grant and you have, you know, the best intentions. I explained this to my sister-in-law on the weekend. She wants to be good and like understand the plights of all peoples of color, but there's also sectarianism within the BIPOC movement. It's, you know, it's really complicated, and it's not one unified voice. It's not like, I mean, maybe the unified voice is destroy white supremacy, but like everything else is complicated, right? And so empowering one voice will help deliver that message, and it will still be complicated. And I feel like this generosity and love and like willingness to listen and willingness to empower people with your stages are so powerful. They're so powerful. You carry so much power by putting those people and those people on the stage. And so your decisions to empower those people will go so far for generations to come. There's going to be a 13-year-old, you know, kid that is going to see like, you know, Ali Farkatura's son play for the first time and be like, oh my God, there's a black guitar player. I haven't seen one. You know, it's so empowering.
Do we have time? Can I say something about this? I mean, this is the most important question, I guess, that everybody's asking. If you're asking as a presenter of 4 artists of color, what can we do? You're already recognizing that you haven't done enough. You're already recognizing that you have not done the right things and you haven't done enough. So I got very clear, very specific, very short roadmap here for you. I'm gonna solve it for you in less than a minute. First of all, you need to stop saying to the artist that I don't have the audience for your work. Because I think you already have played enough gatekeeper role, and it's enough. That's enough of that. If the work is happening by these artists of color across the country, and there's a lot of them, then you cannot be a blockage for people to access that book and for the artists to access those audiences. 2, stop saying to everybody, especially government, that you need more money. I want to know what you're doing with the money that you already have. 3, if with the money that you have, you can only do, instead of 5 works, you can only do 2 works, then let it be the work of Esie and Yolanda. Do less work, but do the right work. And do the work the way the artist wanted to be presented. For some of them is spending 3 days in tech to present the best work they want under the best lights, on the best stages, because they deserve it, and it's theirs, like Yolanda said, their space. It's their space. See, the language is changing. You have to understand this. She's not saying, welcome me to your space. She's saying, this is my space. If they need to spend 3 days of teching, that's fine. Find the money from the rest of your program. If they need to go to different communities, if they need to create a special pricing tickets for certain people from the community they want, you have to create it. So do less work, but do the work. But do these things if you have already recognized that you're not doing enough.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think that is a really great note to end on there. I know there is a lot for people to think about. Once again, this is recorded and we are going to be sharing link. If you have anyone that you want to share this conversation with, please email me. It's Raeesa, Raeesa at prismaticfestival.com. I would be more than happy to share it with you because as we said, we need these conversations to happen, but we need people to hear them and listen to them as well. So once again, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
As usual, I'm not going to go. I'm going to be the last one to go because I just want to see you guys. Till Lori cut us off.
I won't be me.
It will be Raeesa, I guess.
Thank you. I really enjoyed listening to everybody speak today.
Thank you so much. Yes.
And it's really nice to meet these artists who I've heard about, and now I'm meeting on Zoom in Newfoundland.
Still kind of counts.
For sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Kala.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Well, are you going to cut us off, or can
I'm
we
not
have
going to cut us
minutes?
off. No, I'm hanging out. Are you kidding
Well,
me?
I want to know, like, can we have a few more minutes?
Of course.
I just want to say hi to people. Hi, Esie. Hi, Yolanda.
Hi.
Hi, Jorge. Hi, Lori.
Hi.
Everybody.
Thanks
Do
for
you
this,
mind
you guys.
stopping the recording, Raeesa?
It's
We'll just stop the recording here.
it's great to feel listened to. It's
Oh, gosh.
you know.